Welcome back to QHSE Talks. Imagine it is 2:00 a.m. on a Sunday.
Okay.
And a massive fire breaks out at a chemical manufacturing plant.
Right.
So the local fire department arrives on the scene, and they've got the hoses unrolled, adrenaline pumping. But the fire captain takes one look at the locked gates and orders his crew to just stand down and watch the facility burn.
Which sounds crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Why would they do that? Well, because the building is locked, no personnel are on site, and if those firefighters blindly kick down the door and, spray water onto the wrong reactive chemical, they could literally level an entire city block.
Yeah, they could.
So today we are focusing on the exact document that prevents that specific scenario from becoming a tragedy.
It is it's really the ultimate test of a safety professional's foresight. I mean, an emergency plan isn't just some piece of paper you shove in a binder, to satisfy an auditor.
Yeah. When
disaster actually strikes, that document dictates whether chaos reigns or order prevails. It's the bridge between a manageable, controlled incident and an absolute, headline-making catastrophe.
And for all of you out there grinding away, prepping for the Associate Safety Professional exam, the ASP 11, you already know the stakes here.
Oh, yeah.
We are officially kicking off our highly anticipated series on Domain 5, which is Emergency Preparedness and Response. And this domain, it carries a massive 10% weight on the entire exam.
Huge.
Nailing this section is just non-negotiable for passing. So our mission for the specific QHSE talks is to conquer topic 1, which is understand the elements of an emergency response plan.
Which is foundational. I mean, we're going to cover everything required to pass this section of the exam,
right.
But we're also going to extract the practical real-world knowledge that you need to actually perform your duties.
Exactly.
Because, passing a test is a great milestone, but architecting a system that brings everyone home alive is the actual job.
The actual job.
Yeah.
So let's start right at the bedrock. Because I see candidates get tripped up immediately on terminology here.
Oh, constantly.
Right. We hear emergency action plan and emergency response plan thrown around, and it's often interchangeably by people who, quite frankly, should know better.
Yeah, they should.
So where do we draw the line between the two?
Well, the exam will absolutely test your understanding of this distinction, so let's clarify it right now. The foundation is the Emergency Action Plan, or EAP.
Okay, EAP.
Right. Before you can manage a complex multi-agency disaster, you have to possess a functional system to simply get your people out of danger.
Just get them out.
Get them out. The EAP grounds us in the absolute minimum regulatory requirements. This is primarily under OSHA standards, 1910.38 for general industry, and 1926.35 for construction.
So the EAP is purely about escape. It's the baseline.
Exactly.
And the law dictates this baseline has to be in writing, right? It has to be kept in the workplace and available to all employees.
Generally, yes. However, there is a crucial exception that ASP candidates really need to highlight in their notes.
Oh, what's that?
It is a highly testable nuance. If a company has 10 or fewer employees, OSHA permits the EAP to be communicated orally.
Wait, orally?
Yeah, orally.
I have to push back on the practicality of that. I mean, if I'm running a small fabrication shop with 9 employees, the government is saying I can just rely on folks remembering an evacuation lecture I gave them 6 months ago during onboarding?
Pretty much.
From a liability standpoint, that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
From a best practice standpoint, you are absolutely right. I mean, the burden of proof in an investigation, it would still require you to demonstrate that those 9 employees understood the plan.
Right. How do you prove that?
Exactly. An oral plan is incredibly difficult to audit or verify. OSHA includes that exception basically to ease the administrative burden on very small businesses.
Yep.
But any seasoned safety professional will tell you, put it in writing regardless. Human memory in a crisis is terribly fragile.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so whether it's written or oral, OSHA explicitly outlines 6 minimum required elements for an EAP.
Right, 6 elements.
But instead of just listing them like a textbook, let's put ourselves on a factory floor.
Okay, I like that.
An alarm goes off. What is the very first chronological thing that has to happen in this survival story?
So the very first element is the trigger. The plan must detail the procedures for reporting a fire or other emergency.
The trigger.
Yeah, this is the mechanism that sets everything else in motion. Because in a panic, the bystander effect is incredibly powerful.
Oh, right, where everyone assumes someone else called 911?
Exactly. People assume someone else has already called for help. So does the employee dial 911? Do they pull a manual fire alarm pull station? Do they radio a specific internal security desk?
So the EAP has to remove the cognitive load of making a decision right then and there.
Yes.
You don't want someone standing next to a chemical spill debating whether to call their manager or the fire department.
Precisely. Delaying that initial alert causes exponential loss of life and property.
Wow.
So once that trigger is pulled, we move to the second chronological element, which is evacuation procedures and emergency escape route assignments.
Getting people moving.
Moving, but moving systematically.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't just drawing arrows on a floor plan.
Right.
You have to consider flow rates, bottlenecks, primary and secondary routes, and designated assembly points.
Because if the primary route is blocked.
Exactly. If the primary exit is blocked by the fire, your people need muscle memory for the secondary route. They can't be trying to figure it out through the smoke.
Okay, so the alarm is pulled. People are moving toward the exits. What is the third element?
This is where things get complex.
Okay.
The third element requires procedures to be followed by employees who remain to operate critical plant operations before they evacuate.
Hold on. The building is actively burning, the alarms are blaring, and we are explicitly writing a protocol that tells certain human beings to stay inside.
It sounds completely counterintuitive, but yes, it is mandatory for specific environments.
That seems wild. It makes me think of like a sinking ship.
Okay.
You're basically telling the chief engineer to run down into the flooding engine room and manually shut off the main boilers before abandoning ship.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy.
Really?
Yeah, because think about it. If that engineer doesn't shut down the boilers safely, the cold ocean water hits them, and the resulting steam explosion takes out the ship and all the lifeboats floating next to it.
Oh, man, yeah.
Right, so translate that to an industrial setting. Imagine a facility running high-pressure steam systems or a continuous chemical reactor.
Okay.
If every single operator drops what they are doing and just sprints for the parking lot, you might turn a localized, manageable electrical fire into a catastrophic neighborhood-level vapor explosion.
So you were protecting the lifeboats by not letting the hazard escalate. But as a safety professional writing this plan, how do you define the limits? I mean, you can't expect an operator to just stand there turning a valve while the ceiling literally melts above them.
No, of course not. And that is the crux of element 3. You need extreme clarity.
Right.
Who exactly are these designated people? What is the specific mechanical task they must perform? And, most critically, what is their exact trigger to finally abandon the task and leave?
So there's a hard out.
Yes. The plan must define the absolute limit of their required stay based on time, temperature, or proximity of the hazard.
All right, so our critical operators have shut down the reactor and finally evacuated. Everyone is outside. What is the fourth element?
Procedures to account for all employees after an emergency evacuation has been completed.
The head count.
The head count.
And let's elevate the stakes here, because this isn't just a grade school attendance check.
No, it's not.
If I'm an incident commander, why is this head count so legally and tactically critical?
Because if you cannot confidently account for your people, you are forcing emergency responders to make life and death decisions based on bad data.
Wow. Yeah.
If you don't have a rigorous system for tracking contractors, visitors, and, remote workers, a firefighter might risk their own life
Right.
and potentially die in a roof collapse searching a burning structure for a maintenance contractor who actually left the site an hour ago for lunch.
That is a terrifying scenario. Just the liability of sending a rescuer into a lethal environment for a ghost.
It happens.
So you need wardens, a roll call, a visitor log system that travels outside with you.
Exactly. You need all of that. Which brings us to the fifth element.
Okay.
Rescue and medical duties for those employees who are assigned to perform them.
Okay, so like designated first aiders.
Right. If your EAP involves designated internal employees providing first aid, CPR, or confined space rescue, their specific roles and boundaries must be detailed.
Gotcha.
This also intersects heavily with OSHA's bloodborne pathogens standard.
Oh, because of the blood.
Yeah, because designated responders must be offered hepatitis B vaccinations and specific training. You can't just throw people into that role.
You can't just rely on a random Good Samaritan stepping up. You need a defined medical protocol.
Exactly.
And the final element of the EAP.
The sixth one is the names or regular job titles of persons or departments who can be contacted for further information or explanation of duties under the plan.
Basically, who's in charge of the plan?
Right. The EAP is a living document. New hires, during onboarding, they need to know who the architects of this system are if they have questions.
Okay, let's step back and look at the timeline we just built for this EAP.
Okay.
We had the trigger for reporting, right? Then the evacuation routes, the critical operations shutdown, the strict head count, the assigned medical duties, and the contact info.
That's the 6.
That is your emergency action plan. It gets people out.
Yes.
But what happens when the safety professional has to pivot from just escaping the disaster to actually managing it?
Yeah.
Like, so we have a massive hazardous waste spill that requires active mitigation.
Now we cross the threshold. We move from the EAP into the Comprehensive Emergency Response Plan, the ERP.
ERP, all right.
This is a massive elevation in scope. We are no longer just dealing with OSHA's basic general industry standards. We are looking at complex regulatory frameworks like HAZWOPER,
yeah.
which is 29 CFR 1910.120 for hazardous waste operations and emergency response.
That's a mouthful.
It is. We're also looking at consensus standards like NFPA 1600 and international management systems like ISO 45001.
So if the EAP is just the evacuation, the ERP encompasses that evacuation, but adds layers of active tactical response.
Exactly.
What is the fundamental philosophical difference in how these two plans are built?
So the EAP is reactive.
Reactive, okay.
But the ERP is highly proactive and analytical. The ERP requires extensive pre-emergency planning.
Like what?
Well, you cannot write an ERP without documenting your site topography, the physical layout of the drainage systems, and prevailing weather patterns.
Weather patterns.
Yes.
Why does the safety manager need to be a meteorologist?
Okay, imagine a massive release of anhydrous ammonia gas.
Okay.
The EAP might just say, evacuate to the assembly point. But the ERP requires you to know that the prevailing winds at your facility blow from north to south.
Oh, I see.
Right. Therefore, your primary assembly point cannot be south of the plant. Or you are literally just evacuating your people directly into a toxic plume.
Oh man, you'd march them right into the gas.
Exactly. You have to calculate safe distances and identify specialized places of refuge.
That highlights the difference perfectly. Proactive versus reactive. And the ERP also brings in site security, right?
Yeah, site security and control. You have to establish perimeters to keep the public and the media out of the hot zone.
Right, keep the news vans away.
And it mandates strict decontamination procedures. If your responders are mitigating a chemical spill, how do they safely remove their PPE without contaminating the clean zone?
They need a whole decon corridor.
Exactly. And finally, it requires a formal, documented critique of the response and follow-up after the incident is completely over.
I want to circle back to the scenario I opened this QHSE talks with. The 2.0 AM fire, the locked gates, the firefighters standing outside.
Yeah, that was.
The source material highlights a highly testable best practice for the ERP that solves this exact problem. It's the lockbox concept.
Oh, I love the lockbox. It is an incredibly elegant and vital mechanism.
Yeah.
Depending on the risk profile of the facility, the ERP dictates that a highly secure lockbox should be installed outside the perimeter fence or the building envelope.
And what exactly goes inside this box?
Vital intelligence for outside agencies.
Okay.
You place your safety data sheets, your SDSs, along with detailed site maps indicating where bulk chemicals are stored, utility shutoff locations, emergency contact numbers, and master facility keys.
Well, everything they need.
Everything. And the local fire department is given a specialized master key to this exact box.
So in our 2.0 AM scenario, the fire captain doesn't have to guess what's burning.
No guessing.
They walk up, open the lockbox, pull out the SDS for the chemicals in that specific warehouse, and see that, applying water will cause an exothermic reaction.
Exactly.
So they immediately formulate a dry chemical or foam attack plan instead.
That's it. That lockbox is the physical manifestation of your emergency response plan communicating with outside responders when you were fast asleep in your bed 20 miles away.
Wow.
It removes the friction of the unknown.
Speaking of friction, how do we make sure our internal ERP actually meshes with the city's plan? Like, if we have an incident, our internal safety team cannot be speaking a different language than the police, fire, and EMTs rolling up to the gates.
Oh, absolutely. And you've hit on a core compliance point for both HAZWOPER and NFPA 1600.
Oh, really?
The ERP must be fundamentally compatible and integrated with local, state, and federal disaster plans.
So they have to talk to each other.
They must. You cannot have a private manufacturing plant using a homegrown, proprietary radio frequency or localized terminology while while the municipal fire department is trying to interface with them.
Like using different 10 codes or something?
Exactly. Miscommunication in a disaster doesn't just cause delays. I mean, it causes fatalities.
Which brings us to the structural anatomy of how we organize the humans in a crisis.
Yes.
Because you can have the most beautiful, meticulously researched, color-coded ERP sitting on a desk.
Right?
But when the alarms go off and smoke starts filling a corridor, human nature leans heavily toward panic and chaos.
Right.
How does the ERP enforce order?
Well, a plan on paper is useless without a rigidly defined chain of command to actually execute it.
Right.
This is where the Incident Command System, or ICS, is integrated into the ERP.
ICS.
ICS is a standardized, on-scene, all-hazards incident management concept.
So it works for anything.
Exactly. It is designed to be modular and scalable, meaning it works for a small oil spill in a parking lot, and it scales all the way up to manage a multi-state hurricane response.
And for the ASP candidates listening to this QHSE talks, you must know the 5 core components of ICS intimately.
You absolutely have to know them.
They are command, operations, planning, logistics, and finance.
There they are.
As you were listing those earlier in my career, I struggled to conceptualize how they interact until I realized it functions exactly like a biological system in trauma.
A biological system.
Yeah.
I want to hear you parse that out. How do you map ICS to human biology?
Okay, so think of ICS as a human body reacting to a major injury.
What?
The command function is the brain. It is assessing the overall threat, establishing the ultimate survival objectives, and directing the rest of the body on what to focus on.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, the brain sets the strategy. What about operations?
Operations are the hands.
The hands.
They are the ones actually turning the wrenches, applying the tourniquets, spraying the fire hoses. They're executing the tactical physical work required to stabilize the incident, all based on the brain strategy.
Okay, I track that. And logistics.
Logistics is the cardiovascular system.
Ah, the blood.
The blood. It is constantly pumping oxygen, nutrients, and critical supplies to the muscles, which is the operations team. If logistics fails, the hands run out of foam, or drinking water, or replacement air cylinders. They fatigue, and the response dies.
So brain, hands, blood. What is the planning function in this analogy?
Planning is the eyes.
The eyes.
The eyes aren't doing the heavy physical lifting, but they are looking ahead at the terrain. They're tracking the weather patterns we talked about, anticipating the next hazard, monitoring the status of resources, and feeding that critical data back to the brain so the strategy can adapt.
This is really good, which leaves finance.
Finance is the stomach.
The stomach.
It is digesting the fuel and tracking the massive expenditure of resources required to keep the whole organism alive. And crucially, if finance isn't carefully tracking every single contractor hour, equipment rental, and medical cost during the response, the organization might survive the fire, but literally go bankrupt during the recovery.
That is a brilliant mechanism for remembering the structure. Brain, hands, blood, eyes, and stomach. It takes a very bureaucratic framework and makes it deeply intuitive for the exam.
Yeah, it really helped me.
But this raises a highly technical question for the safety professional who is assigning real employees to be the brain or the hands in this system.
Right.
How do you choose them? You can't just point to the nearest shift supervisor and say, hey, you are the incident commander now.
Right. You have to navigate the classic OSHA trap of competent versus qualified personnel.
Yes.
And this nuance is all over the exam. Break down the mechanism of that distinction for us.
It is a vital legal distinction. Let's start with a qualified person.
Okay, qualified.
A qualified person has a recognized degree, certificate, professional standing, or extensive knowledge and experience. They possess the deep technical knowledge to solve problems related to the subject matter.
So if I have a chemical engineer with a PhD in fluid dynamics on staff, they are highly qualified to understand exactly how a toxic gas will expand through the HVAC system.
Precisely. They have the knowledge. But a competent person is defined by OSHA quite differently.
How so?
A competent person is someone who is capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards in the surroundings. A&D, this is the critical mechanism, has the explicit authorization by the employer to take prompt corrective measures to eliminate them.
Ah. Authorization.
Yes, authorization.
Yeah.
The PhD engineer is vastly qualified, right?
Right.
But if they do not have the managerial authority to unilaterally order a total plant shutdown or authorize emergency expenditures, they are not the competent person in that scenario.
The authority to act is the dividing line.
Exactly.
You can have all the technical brilliance in the world, but if you can't legally pull the plug to stop the hazard, you aren't the competent person. That is such a vital distinction for building your ICS. You need competent people in command roles.
Exactly. The ERP relies on competent individuals who possess both the knowledge to see the hazard and the organizational power to stop it.
Okay, let's look at the life cycle of what we've built here. We painstakingly wrote the EAP for escaping. We expanded it into a comprehensive ERP to mitigate the disaster, integrate with local fire departments, and build our lockbox.
We did.
We structured our personnel using the ICS body of brains, hands, and eyes, ensuring they are competent, not just qualified.
Right.
So we print out this massive, beautiful document, we slide it into a red binder, place it on the shelf in the safety office, and our job is done.
That right there is the single most dangerous assumption a safety professional can make.
I figured you'd say that.
If you put that binder on a shelf and walk away, it will fail you the exact second you need it most.
Because a static plan in a dynamic environment basically rots.
It decays rapidly. This brings us to the final and perhaps most relentless phase of emergency preparedness.
Yeah.
Testing, maintenance, and continuous improvement.
Right.
Both ISO 4501 and NFPA 1600 are anchored in the Plan-Do-Check-Act continuous improvement cycle.
The PDCA cycle.
Yes.
Right.
Writing the ERP is just the plan phase. You have to keep the organism alive.
And the primary mechanism for that is drills and exercises.
Yes.
But I want to push back on how most companies do this.
Please do.
Most fire drills are a joke.
They are.
I mean, the alarm rings, everyone groans, they grab their coffee, and slowly amble out to the parking lot while chatting about the weekend. That doesn't test anything.
You are absolutely right. A proper exercise isn't a theatrical performance meant to look good for the safety committee.
Right.
The explicit goal of a drill is to push the system until you find its breaking points in a safe, controlled environment.
Find the breaking points.
You have to test the mechanisms. Do the emergency radios actually penetrate the concrete in the basement?
Oh, good question.
Do the automatic fire doors drop as intended, or is someone parking a forklift under one?
You almost want failure during the drill. If the drill is flawless, your scenario is way too easy.
Exactly. Because after every drill, and certainly after any real-world emergency, NFPA 1600 mandates a formal critique. The organization has to brutally and honestly assess its performance, identify the systemic gaps, and revise the ERP.
And beyond drills, there is a mechanism that quietly invalidates established ERPs every single day without anyone noticing.
Oh, yeah.
Management of change, or MOC.
MOC is the lifeblood of process safety. The principle is that any change in the workplace environment, personnel, or processes must automatically trigger a formal review of the emergency response plan.
I want to dive deep into an MOC failure here, because this is where the aha moments really happen for safety professionals.
Okay, let's do it.
Walk us through a scenario where a seemingly tiny administrative change cascades into a massive ERP failure.
All right, let's look at a supply chain substitution.
Okay.
You operate a facility that uses a specific non-flammable industrial cleaning solvent. Your ERP is built around this.
Got it.
Your designated evacuation routes take employees right past the solvent storage area because historically it presents a no-fire risk.
Okay, makes sense. It's non-flammable.
But one day, your purchasing department finds a cheaper solvent from a new supplier.
Oh boy.
They swap it out. It cleans just as well, so nobody in production complains. But what purchasing didn't realize is that this new solvent is highly volatile and gives off heavier than air, flammable vapors.
So it sinks to the floor.
Yes. Because there was no management of change process, the safety department wasn't notified, the ERP is not updated.
Oh, wow. I see exactly where this is going.
6 months later, a small spark ignites a fire in a totally different part of the plant.
Okay.
The alarm sounds. The employees follow their training perfectly.
Because they practiced.
Right. They use the primary evacuation route defined in your pristine ERP binder, but that route leads them directly past the solvent storage area, which is now rapidly accumulating highly flammable vapors along the floor.
Oh my God.
You have just evacuated your workforce directly into a secondary explosion hazard.
Because a buyer in a cubicle saved 5 cents a gallon on solvent, your entire 500-page emergency response plan became a death trap.
Yes.
That is the true mechanism of an MOC failure. It's not usually a massive new machine being installed. It's the quiet erosion of the assumptions your plan was built on.
Perfectly said. Or consider personnel changes.
Okay.
The competent person you designated as your incident commander, the brain of your ICS, takes a job at a competitor.
Happens all the time.
Right. No MOC is performed. 3 months later, an emergency happens, the alarm goes off, and everyone is standing in the command post waiting for orders from a leader who no longer works there.
Which means the safety professional's day-to-day job is essentially constant vigilance. Writing the plan is just a finite project, but maintaining the plan is an entire career.
It is the relentless auditing of the system. You are tracking leading indicators like the percentage of maintenance staff who have completed their confined space rescue refresher this month.
Right.
You are tracking lagging indicators like the fact it took 12 minutes to get a full head count during the last drill instead of the target 8 minutes.
You're always measuring.
Always. You are verifying that the newly hired night shift supervisor actually possesses the physical key to the lockbox and actually knows how to read the SDS inside it.
It is the daily gardening of safety culture. Pulling the weeds of complacency, watering the roots of training, ensuring the soil of the organization is actually healthy enough to support the plan.
That is a profound way to view it. You are ensuring that the capability to respond is a living, breathing reflex within the organization, not just ink on paper.
Let's take a breath and summarize the massive amount of ground we've covered today for this QHSE Talks.
Good idea.
Because for everyone taking notes for the ASP exam, we started with the strict, reactive regulatory minimums of the Emergency Action Plan, the EAP.
The 6 elements.
Right. We walked through the chronological timeline, the trigger to report, the evacuation routes, the critical operation shutdown, the strict head count, the medical duties, and the contact info. And we established that the 10-employee oral exception rule is a highly testable fact, even if it's a practical liability.
Yes. And from there, we expanded our scope into the Comprehensive Emergency Response Plan, the ERP.
A big one.
We shifted from escaping the hazard to proactively managing it. We discussed HACE-WOPR, the necessity of understanding weather and topography, site security, and that brilliant lockbox concept to provide immediate friction-free intelligence to local fire departments.
We then built our incident command system, the brain, the hands, the eyes, the blood, and the stomach, and highlighted the vital authority-based difference between a qualified person and a competent person.
Very important for the exam.
Super important. Finally, we proved that a static plan rots, emphasizing the need to relentlessly drill to find breaking points and how management of change prevents a minor purchasing decision from turning an evacuation route into a hazard zone.
Yeah.
If you understand these concepts as deeply interconnected mechanisms, you're going to absolutely crush Domain 5, Topic 1.
You certainly will. But before we sign off, I want to leave the listeners with a final provocative thought.
Well, late on us.
Something outside the bounds of the regulatory textbooks that really speaks to the true burden of this profession.
I am ready for it. What is the final thought?
Well, we spend hundreds of hours documenting these plans. We create detailed topographical maps, meticulously tabbed binders, and redundant encrypted digital files on cloud servers.
We do.
But what if the disaster itself destroys your access to the plan?
What do you mean?
Imagine a massive ransomware cyber attack locks you out of your entire network at the exact moment a catastrophic structural collapse buries your physical safety office.
Wow.
The digital files are encrypted and the binders are under tons of rubble. The plan, physically and digitally, is gone.
A true worst-case compounding scenario.
It happens. As a safety professional, you have to ask yourself today, how much of your emergency response plan is actually ingrained in the muscle memory and culture of your workforce?
Right.
When the screens are dark and the binders are burning, does your shift supervisor still know how to organically form an incident command system in the parking lot?
Just from memory.
Does your team still know the safe distances based on the wind? Or was your entire preparedness strategy just living on a piece of paper that no longer exists?
That is a chilling but absolutely necessary reality check. If the plan only exists in the binder, it doesn't really exist at all. It has to live in the people.
Exactly.
Thank you for that incredible breakdown, and thank you to everyone listening. Study hard, trust your training, stay safe out there, and join us next time for the continuation of our ASP exam series right here on QHSE Talks.